forced to fix the problem sooner.
If these airplanes, these large commercial airplanes, are grounded, it's an economic disaster. So what they do is they lobby in the regulatory agency in the United States, it's the FAA, to allow them to do the fixes over time when the airplanes are in for normal maintenance. And that way, they're not taken out of service. But when they do that, when they allow the airlines, the air carriers, and the manufacturers to fix these over time, in essence what the FAA is doing is they're gambling with the lives of the passengers and the crew that are flying the airplanes during the time they're not fixed.
After the deaths on Flight 811, the FAA instantly shortened the deadline for fixing the cargo door from 18 months to just 30 days.
It was only when United had gone from one of the airlines of first resort to one of the airlines of last resort in New Zealand that they, just totally out of the blue, we got a letter inviting us over to see them. And when we got there, they were just going to do a PR exercise on us. But we just laid into them, pointed out where they'd all got it wrong.
And you could see them changing during it to realising that we did know what we were talking about and that we put a lot of serious effort into it.
One of them actually broke down because they'd never had to meet next of kin before. And it ended up with the Vice President of United taking us round the maintenance facility, and he had people running off in all directions just to get the information that we wanted, questions answered. We could go anywhere that we wanted, and everything was laid on for us because at that stage they realised that we really did know what we were talking about.
The pressure of the Campbell's campaign eventually began to pay off. The vital piece of evidence that could prove them right, the cargo door, still lay 2 miles down in the Pacific Ocean. But as articles appeared in the American press, the NTSB commissioned the US Navy to search for it. 100 miles south of Honolulu, a deep submersible began to trawl the seabed.
We went to Honolulu and waited there while they had their attempts, and they finally recovered the door from 14,000 feet of water, which was the deepest recovery ever at that time. And we were phoned within an hour of it coming out of the water.
But before the Campbells could see it, the door was swiftly removed to Boeing's plant in Seattle. The Campbells went in hot pursuit.
We went over to Boeing and they wouldn't show it to us. So they reckoned that the crucial pieces had gone to the NTSB. So again, we got in the car and drove across to Washington, D.C. We arrived at Ron Schleid's office, and Ron looks at his watch and he says, "I can give you 5 minutes." So about 3 hours later, we had the pieces that they recovered in our hand, and they acknowledged that we were definitely correct. It was an electrical malfunction, and that they said they would fix the planes, they would make sure it never happens again, but just don't hold your breath that the report will never be changed.
Even with the evidence of an electrical malfunction in their hands, the NTSB refused to change their report. Then, in June 1991, fate intervened. A 4-year-old United 747 was sitting on the apron in New York when the sea latch motors started up and the door opened itself.
There was no way that they could hide it any longer. They simply couldn't deny that it was an electrical malfunction that was covering it.
After recovery of the door was that in fact the actual...
Finally, the NTSB publicly issued a revised report that concurred with the Campbell's version.
There was an inadvertent failure of either the switch or the wiring that caused an uncommanded opening of the door.
It's nice that other people know that you're right and had been all along, and the support that they had given you was, was vindicated.
The Campbells spent thousands of dollars of their own money on their campaign. They were never interested in a financial settlement for Lee's death, but they did persuade United and Boeing to set up a university scholarship in his name.
I couldn't have lived with myself if we had done no investigating ourselves. It was just something we both felt we needed to do. We didn't even discuss it. We just knew that's what we would do.
Yeah.
But despite long and public campaigns like that of the Campbells, critics fear that the airline industry has not learnt the lessons from Flight 811.
The regulatory agencies, they have a dual charge. One is to encourage aviation, and another is aviation safety. And when they get in a position where you have economics up against air safety, they tend to err on the side of economics rather than safety.
Serious accidents caused by known defects have continued to occur. In the 1990s, known problems with icing on aircraft wings caused a series of crashes. At least 3 planes have had fatal fires due to known dangers from flammable insulation material. And in 1996, a fully laden 747 blew itself up when known faults in the wiring are thought to have ignited flammable vapors in the fuel tanks. Inevitably, experts are skeptical about the aviation industry's record of balancing profit against prevention.
We've seen the wiring problem both in United 811, which was eventually turned out to be the cause of that accident, and also in TWA 800, where we had an explosion in the centerline fuel tank. The industry answer to 20 and 30-year-old wiring, and when the wiring can fray, break, crack, cause a short, which can either ignite fuel, like in TWA 800, or open a cargo door, like in United 11. And what the industry says, don't touch it. Don't go in there. Don't inspect it. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to remove it, because it's so brittle that if you go in there to try to fix it, you're going to do more damage than you can do good. And that's what I call the ostrich approach to maintenance and safety. You know, we've decided that you can have an spark of ignition in the centerline fuel tank of a large air carrier. But so far we've been lucky. We've only had one every 10 years. We've only blown up 3 or 4 airplanes. You know, to go in and replace this wiring would ground all these airplanes, would be astronomically expensive. You know, 1 airplane every 10 years, 1 airplane every 5 years, 200-300 people, cost of doing business. Cost of doing business. And that's a great economic analysis, and unless your mother or your child is on board one of these airplanes that happens to pay the price for their economic satisfaction.
For some of the survivors of Flight 811, the cost has been heavy.
Each crew member handled it differently. I know there are still 2 crew members that have never set foot on an aircraft again. It was very difficult for me. I was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. You can't reason, you can't think. Making the slightest decision is very difficult. You're just at a total loss. So it was very difficult to cope with.